to share something with you. That might put me in a very negative light, yeah.
Relationships are not my forte.
See if someone grabbed up my wife or something completely different ballgame.
I'll walk away from here, and this has been like a therapy session.
This is Umar Ahmed for IFL TV, proudly sponsored by Everlast. I'm joined by Gareth A. Davies, or as he's now known, Gareth Numbers A. Davies. Is that all right with you?
Whatever you want, young man.
Yeah, Gareth, obviously a heavy week for us all in British boxing last week. Has there been any developments? What's the latest, if there has been?
Well, the latest, of course, is I would say the doctor who made comments about it's in a retrospective historical podcast saying that he's licensed by the Boxing Board of Control, spoke to the Boxing Board of Control on Sunday night about this doctor. We did a small story in the Telegraph saying he denied any wrongdoing, and through his lawyer. We don't know absolutely if he was working with Conor Benn for this fight, but he was saying that he'd made comments anyway, alleging that 80 to 90% of boxers at the elite level could be on PEDs or different types of banned substances, and also that it was really easy to cheat the system and that you're an idiot to fail it. So they're very strong comments. Spoke to Robert Smith, the Boxing Board of Control, about this and said he'll be investigating it and looking into it. That's what he said. We will be looking into it. But also, this guy's not a board doctor. Robert Smith was at pains to point out he is licensed by the board to do tournaments and to do medicals. And that he's not a board doctor as such. He's just licensed by the board. I think he got his license through the Central Area Council, because I think there were pictures of his license doing the round. He's claimed in the Telegraph with my colleague Ben Rumsby that he took his website down because of lots of malicious and abusive comments towards him. That's why he's taken his social media down. That will play out. That will play out as time goes on. Everything's going to be forensically investigated now. It's a mainstream news story. And then the other developments really are the comments from Chris Eubank Sr, which we're going to discuss, I imagine, from South Africa, where he spoke to Tunji Adeyi and Spencer Fearon on their, is it The Time Is Right podcast?
The Fight Is Right.
The Fight Is Right. The Fight Is Right podcast. Which it was a great podcast. They're great guys. We had Spencer on Talk Sport with us on Saturday night as well, on Fight Night, in which really we spent 2 hours talking about this. Michaela Meyer revealing in the lead up to her last fight here, in the build up to Alicia Baumgardner, she didn't have one UCAD test. But we had a lot of people on Saturday night expressing their views on it, about what a serious moment this is in British boxing. But as we know, and I'm at pains to point this out, boxing moves at a slow pace, and the board is not the quickest in they've got their processes. So I think this will play out over a long period of time. We know the right thing happened last week, which was that the board prohibited the bout. That's the right thing to have happened. It didn't look good on Eddie Hearn and Kalle Sauerland that they wanted to move the fight on and still do it. It didn't even look good on Chris Eubank Jr. taking the fight. And when you saw his weight cut in the end last Friday, he looked emaciated, if I can put it that way. And, his brain will have been rattling around in his skull dehydrated like that, like marbles in a tin. And you've got to think of the severity and seriousness of these situations. And it's just, look, it's a horrible situation for British boxing and for Conor Benn and for Chris Eubank, and for all the fighters on the undercard who've expressed their dismay at not being paid. I know a lot of them have got fights now, but it's a wholly unsatisfactory situation. And I think they need to bring testing system into line. It needs to be more transparent, and you can't hide these things behind a closed door. I mean, was clear or even comments last week that I'd known about this for 2 weeks when the story broke. No, I hadn't. That's the Riyadh Al Samurai's Daily Mail story broke. No, if I'd known about this 2 weeks earlier, I'd have been at Eddie Hearn's door and at the board's door asking about this. You know, no one involved in boxing is going to sit back and allow a fight to go ahead if you know one of the boxers tested positive for a banned substance. In right.
Sorry, Gareth. The connection was just a bit unstable there. I think I got you saying that there were some rumours going around that you knew about this a few weeks ago. Hopefully the Wi-Fi.
There were some rumours going around, or some that I'd known about it for 2 weeks. Absolute nonsense. I'd found out half an hour that one of the boxers had tested positive for a banned substance and the fight could be off, or the fight was off. The board were calling off because obviously they decided on Tuesday night, didn't they? I think it was. It was absolute nonsense. There's no way anyone's going to sit back at Covers Boxing and not tell anyone about a drug story. It's just ludicrous. No one would do that. I don't know anyone that would sit back and be in cahoots or whatever with the promoter and the board and not do that. But the right things happened. The right thing has happened for boxing, thankfully. But they need more transparency now. They need to bring the testing procedures into place, and we need more transparency. And we're going to need more transparency now from this point onwards about this whole case. You know, whether Conor Benn does get banned for 4 years or 2 years. 4 years is the recommended period now, isn't it? But they can reduce it based on evidence and so on. If he's made a mistake, if it's a genuine mistake, whatever it is. But we do need transparency. We need people to speak. I think Eddie's in Australia this week, isn't he? With his fight, so he's out of the picture in some ways. But it was a wholly unsatisfactory week for boxing. And as I say, clarity, transparency over these issues are essential.
What's your understanding of UCAD ever requesting documentation from Vada before when a fighter's failed a Vada test? Has that ever happened? We know that's happening now and that's an ongoing process. Has that ever happened before, Gareth?
Not that I can recall, but I'm not in the kind of the direct, that as it's being reported at the moment, that a direct request for the details and the procedures. I don't recall that, but there's nothing wrong with that. Why shouldn't, look, if the boxers sign up, if they do it because they're doing it for a double safety, if you like. Got UCAD testing, you got Vada testing. Clearly Vada tests more than UCAD do. So in a sense, if they do that, if they sign up for the testing, which is right, because they follow the WADA code, World Anti-Doping Agency code, if you test positive, you've got to follow that code. Simple as that. And it helps both boxers. But I'm still surprised that Eubank Jr. was prepared to go ahead with the bout. He was horribly underestimating, and he admitted it to me in an interview that he was underestimating Conor Benn. He couldn't help it, based on experience, size, who Benn had fought so far, and what he believed in his own abilities. But when you saw him weight drained like that, it looked worrying to me that he was going to go in. Did you hear me saying that, you know, that he looked so dehydrated that he looked terribly affected by the weight cut? Emaciated.
All right, just to close off, you sort of touched on Senior's comments. I'll read out the exact quote that he gave to The Fight Is Right. "You have toddlers looking after us fighters. These guys are called managers and promoters. These guys, I'm coming for you. You try to murder my boy." In this case, what can actually Chris Eubank Sr. do in this situation in regards to Eddie and Calisal? And I'm guessing he's talking about those two individuals. What can he actually do here?
Well, he's potentially talking about legal action there, isn't he? I don't think he's literally coming for them physically, but that was at the end with Spencer and with Tunde. It was at the end of a 10-minute interview, by the way, in which he kind of finished speaking and he got emotional again. And he did express it early on in the interview that he's very unhappy with his son not listening to him, one. Yeah. I'll go over it in a minute because it has some very interesting things in that interview. And he's in South Africa with his wife, and I think it must have been done a couple of days ago, maybe Sunday. And he's saying that he's very unhappy, and we all are, that they went ahead and made a plan, Calla and Eddie, to keep the fight going through a loophole, through a drug testing loophole. And the fact that UCAD are the sanctioned testing body for the Boxing Board of Control, and that Vada aren't. And that was purely, they were trying to push that through on a loophole and to quash what the board wanted to do. Obviously, the board did what they did the right thing. And obviously, Hearn and Sauerland were pressed into following because they would have gone ahead with the fight. Clearly, they were intending to go ahead because they've got Chris's agreement. What medical advice and legal advice they took, I just don't know that they were on about. But I mean, Senior's very unhappy, and I think he's within his rights to be unhappy. And he seems to be unhappy that his son didn't listen to him. As he said, I said this months ago, this is a fight that shouldn't happen. Although to contradict him, Chris Eubank Jr. told me in an interview with me that his dad said, wait till next year for a stadium fight. So there's a little bit of contradiction there, but I understand his emotion and what he's expressing. He's lost one son tragically already last year, Sebastian. He's really worried about this son, and he feels that these guys were putting his son in there and should have been cancelling the fight once the drug test came out. And he's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And also, Chris is expressing disappointment that his son's not listening to him. Expressing disappointment that Floyd Mayweather is one of his son's heroes, that he's too much into bling bling. I'm sure you heard the interview. But it was very much an emotional father talking about fears for his son, and a man who's been in the ring 24 world title fights. Remember, Chris Eubank Sr. knows what he's talking about. You know, ended up in hospital after one of the Benn fights. So, being involved in tragedy in the ring. I mean, I'm good friends with Michael Watson. I did the marathon with him in 2003 when it took us 6 days to do the London Marathon, when Michael was raising money. I think he raised 200,000 for charity at the time, for the Brain and Spine Foundation, by the brilliant, founded by the brilliant consultant neurosurgeon Peter Hamlin, who operated 6 times on his brain to keep Watson alive. And I've seen Chris around Michael Watson many times, or several times, and it does affect him every time. You can see it. He shrinks. He's not the normal Chris. He's very affected by it. He knows about Nigel Benn and Gerald McClellan. You know, there's the Nick Blackwell story with his own son. Nick's not fighting anymore, and he had a brain injury. So I think he's very affected by it. And I think, can he do anything effective? Well, he's got a massive voice. He's got a massive voice, and that story resonated through the national newspapers today. And I think he will continue to probably wage that campaign that the promoters weren't ethically correct in what they were doing. We all know that. It was not ethically correct. Now, for whatever reason, Calla and Eddie saw fit to push on through to see if they could get it through. I'm sure they didn't believe in their heart of hearts they'd be able to put the fight on. But maybe they were testing the parameters of what the board were able to do, what the boxing board were able to do. I think it's very disappointing that, you know, one of the biggest promoters in the world is taking on their own board and pushing them behind the scenes and potentially suing them, supposedly, over them not allowing an event to go ahead, even though one of the boxers tested positive for a banned substance. If they can prove he didn't take it, if he can be exonerated, then they can come back and do that fight again. I'm sure they all want to do the fight, but they've got to prove what was found in Conor Benn's body was either done mistakenly or he's had the substance in his body. Every fighter, every athlete is responsible for what goes into their body. So by whatever means that got into his body, he's responsible for it. You don't get it by drinking tap water, so this, transparency here needs to be to the fore. It's a horrible, complex story. It doesn't do boxing any favors at all. The critics are out, those that want to bring boxing down and say, that it is lawless in a way. It is a lawless sport. When it goes wrong, this is why, and it's a shame.
Gareth A. Davies, thank you very much for your time, and no doubt we'll speak soon. All right, take care. Thank you.
Cheers, Umar.
I'm going to share something with you. That might put me in a very negative light, yeah.
Relationships are not my forte.
See if someone grabbed up my wife for saying completely different ballgame.
I'll walk away from it, and this has been like a therapy session.